Um, and good afternoon, everyone attending CRESTCon for 2022. Thank you for coming to my talk, especially straight after the lunch break. Hopefully the delicious food KPMG provided does not put us into a carb coma. So, a bit about me. I run a cybersecurity practice. I also lecture at UNSW Canberra or ADFA, and I also go off and do a few bits and pieces of weird and wonderful research when I can, which has also shaped some of this talk as well. Just one thing I will call out, it did happen recently. Content warning, I do have one of the screenshots here on my presentation does have a bit of offensive language. It's not my creation, it's just a reference to an event that did take place that did have someone that did enjoy a bit of swearing. So today I'm here to talk to you about wireless cybersecurity and more so everything left and right of what we already know or what is typically defined and established testing activities and doctrine that we've had for the last 12 years. But leading into that, I just want to take you through a bit of why is this relevant, get you across some of the basic considerations in wireless technology and build up for that, and also just take you through a few scenarios as best as I can in the 30 minutes that I have available. But I think it's important to understand why have I put together this talk as part of this presentation. So besides the you can take that QR code. I don't want a tweet of he's put swearing language on screen. So a bit about what's driven this talk. This is my personal opinion, and feel free to criticise it this afternoon in our networking drinks, but I don't think we do wireless pen testing properly. I have a lot of students that turn up to my wireless class at ADFA that learn a few of my thought processes I have about conducting wireless pen testing. I also learn a few things from them, but for the most part, I find myself getting a lot of students who turn up and either keep talking about a pineapple without understanding how it functions, or focusing on particular approaches and thoughts and themes that have been introduced to them, whether it's through the movies or through random articles they've read in 30 seconds. And then second they start conducting the lab activities I've created for them, it becomes apparent that this is actually a fairly difficult thing to think about, but two, there's a lot of complexity in terms of considerations for how we do testing that take our technology appreciation, also factor in a lot of our human appreciation, so we've got to be in close proximity, but also social aspects as well, followed by what are the second, third order effects of what we can achieve. And that's also another thing to think about is we can have a very bad habit of just having a singular focus when it comes to things such as testing wireless technologies or even focusing on a particular interface without evaluating what is the total system that we're evaluating and the effect that our system is trying to achieve and how do we circumvent it. But also I wanted to give everyone a really good appreciation of here is the landscape of wireless technologies that exist in our physical environment around us, and really go down that path of curiosity and discovery. I think that's something that I think needs to drive us more in cybersecurity than the desire to dominate another human being through testing, which I think can sometimes become a little bit too much of a driver sometimes. So why is this relevant? I had some really great talks here today that have included the social aspects of the technologies that we deal with and that human aspect. We've also had a really solid set of technical discussions as well, and there's a piece that I think we also forget as well, the physical element. So when I like talking about cybersecurity, I will always bring in this Venn diagram as a frame of reference. Cybersecurity isn't purely a technology thing, it's not a social thing, it's not a governance thing, it's the intersection between multiple different components that lead us to achieving a desired effect. And I would also say some of the ways that we approach our thought process on technology or cybersecurity is that we can have a fairly bad habit of focusing purely on a particular target as opposed to what I call a contiguous nature of an environment, which is everything's free flowing, How does everything influence everything else? So this is an example I like using in some of my courses. If you head out along the Madura Highway, leaving Canberra here, is the Madura Solar Power Farm. Canberra right now, I believe, has about 5 to 10% of its power generated through solar power panels. If you are doing my course, you end up driving nice and close to them and capturing a bunch of 802.15.4 traffic that is either doing a monitoring or control function, which is communicating back to the green building in that photo, that's then going off to a central system for monitoring, possibly control as well. And the intent is to also keep these solar panels perpendicular to the sun. So this entire exercise we do is really just to get students thinking about other technologies that exist, but also thinking about them in a temporal environment where it's actually leading to achieving some desired outcome. And so when I talk about framing and our thought process, we can get really caught up on an information system that's using a WPA to 802.11 network with a pre-shared key, trying to computate, how long is that key going to take to break. Whereas if we looked at, say, a more of a total systems approach, things I'm looking at here are, okay, what are the physical parameters we have to get access? At a layer 2 level, if I denied service, what does this lead to? And then at the higher, more conceptual layers, if we undermine confidence in renewable energy, does that mean we start switching back to coal? There's also an economic system associated with this. If we can negate the supply of energy in Canberra, does that increase demand and therefore increase price? And can we commercially exploit that to achieve a set end state, as opposed to simply jumping to, it's got to be an APT because APTs are doing something? And so leading on from that thought process, I think it's important for us to start appreciating the what and the why, and also looking at scenarios as well when we look at wireless cybersecurity. A book I would recommend everyone to read is Eric Hasseltine's book, The Spy in Moscow Station, to get a bit of an appreciation of how to actually think through, when you are dealing with wireless environments, how are they all interacting and what are the threats and risks associated with this? In this case, the US Embassy in Moscow was bugged. A particular smart individual started making determinations on how and where and why the bugs were working from a theoretical standpoint. This then led to a project that saw them tearing apart their IBM typewriters and identified particular bugs that would capture keystrokes that were being typed. And the complexity of this whole thing pretty much takes a book to read through, but thinking through the process, and also even more broadly, if we have a look at Eastern Europe and certainly continental Europe, considerations around wireless technologies and even tempest-based attacks are fairly well understood. I think it's an area that we don't really rehearse particularly well here in Australia because we don't expose ourselves to it. And more recently, in the Ukraine, if we were just thinking purely 802.11 as our only thought process when it came to securing wireless technologies, we'd be in a pretty bad state. And I would even say some of us may have been caught off guard by the idea of Viasat going down and losing that as a communications path, and also the jamming technologies that are available to the Russian military. We've also seen some reports of loss of GPS. However, based on some of the analysis I've read so far, apparently because the Russian units are also using civilian GPS, targeting hasn't taken place because it would also interfere with their communications. And then looking at the interception and impersonation of cellular communications in the Ukraine, especially leading into the attack on the 24th of February, there was a bunch of stuff happening on the eastern part of the country that led to, the attempt was to coerce a run on banks. Thankfully that didn't happen, and everyone was a little bit more cognizant and resilient to this. But are we prepared for those sort of attacks here in Australia? I mean, this is going perhaps to one extreme, but it gives us similar to the last piece I talked about, it gives us a slightly expanded appreciation. So let's start off on the basics. So 802.11 is what we commonly refer to as Wi-Fi. There's now 19 separate sub-protocols within this, so ABGN as the common ones. 802.11ah is another one as well, that's operating at about 900 megahertz. I have tried war driving with that around Sydney and no one's using it except me. But there's a bunch of attacks that can exist against this that we often see in legacy systems that can be exploited against things such as WEP. However, no one's really using WEP anymore. That being said, we are seeing things like security misconfigurations. So things such as guest networks having access to the corporate network, even though a corporate wireless network will still rely on something like WPA2 Enterprise with certificates. There suddenly becomes another path. We also factor in things such as individual and organisational use in this space, and how does that delineate between security controls. We also have things such as client-side attacks. I think one of the shortfalls we have when we do pen testing is we start targeting servers, or we start going, okay, we're going after the domain controller because the thought leader at our cybersecurity practice said that was crown jewels, without fully appreciating, well, a part of that might actually be targeting clients that are connected to an 802.11 network and using that as our path. And then from here, can we do things such as pattern of life analysis? Can we do a straight out layer 2 denial of service attack and jam? And what's the response to that? Especially if it's at 9:55 before you have traders coming online at 10 o'clock who are using a wireless communications system. So those are some of the things that I think we often overlook at an 802.11 space, but this is, I think, for a lot of us, what we commonly refer to as Wi-Fi. It's another path that I think many of us are familiar with. Just to explain the photo, this is a gentleman walking around DEF CON where he is capturing on each Wi-Fi channel in 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz range, and the intent was to just capture and see what's happening within the wireless space there. But what are some other weird and wonderful protocols that are out there? So 802.15.4 also operates on ISM bands. Its intent is really to create a low power, low interaction and low cost network that can also be used not only in terms of client-server environment, but also creating mesh networks as well. The intent of this is really more of an OT related technology, but we are now seeing with a lot of convergence, we see these sort of systems being used in things such as sensors, locks. You saw them in the solar power plant I mentioned there before. If you do a drive around Barangaroo, you'll see a ton of these networks that are apparently controlling the blinds, as well as possibly even controlling things like air conditioners. So when I did a war drive back in 2018, using the system that you see on the bottom there, we identified 549 unique devices as part of this war drive, performing a number of different functions within the area. And for most of the part, these devices were sending a message, say, once every 30 to 60 seconds. If I only had one of these Texas Instrument dongles, I would have been able to pick it up, but because I was capturing across all 16 channels, we're able to see a lot more that was occurring within the environment. But is this a technology that forms part of your organisation's network, or does it provide some sort of support to your organisation's ability to deliver services? So say, for example, we're in a hotel now. Are the door locks for that hotel controlled by 802.15.4? Is there a denial of service condition that can be achieved, or is there an unlock feature that can be exploited through this standard? Continuing on, we then have a number of other weird and wonderful systems at 433 megahertz. So these include things like tyre pressure systems, tyre pressure management systems, temperature and environmental sensors. So do you have an environmental sensor that's operating in this frequency range that is then influencing something such as an air conditioner, as an example? We have car keys. There was actually a really awesome bug disclosed, I believe it was in a Honda vehicle a few days ago, where someone identified that the rolling code wasn't particularly effective, and you could actually send an unlock request to cars. Now, does that present a risk, especially, say, if there's laptops in there? Security devices and electronic systems, you'll see up on the top right there an Arlec 202 home alarm system, $70 from Bunnings. that has a static key to arm and disarm that system. Besides that fact, there's no frequency hopping, which would prevent things such as jamming. So that's specific to a very particular type of technology that, say, if I just gave you a common tool set, may not allow you to identify that tool, may not allow you to identify that as a risk. And so when I talk about things that we've forgotten in testing, going through the system and actually saying, okay, well, this is its intent, how can I interfere with its intent or undermine confidentiality, integrity, availability, safety, reliability as a few aspects of it. Satellite's also another area we're starting to see as an area of curiosity. You just saw me talk about before, back in February of this year, the suspicion that Viasat terminals were compromised as part of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. On top of that, we're dependent on GPS. Has anyone ever interacted with an environment that's using NTP that is dependent on its time from a GPS? Yep, a couple of us have. So if that can be manipulated, does that allow us to alter time in the system that can then allow us to manipulate, say, a rolling key for two-factor authentication that we've been able to capture? Iridium networks as well. There's a body of research done out of Europe, presented at Chaos Communications Congress, that's looked at being able to SMS voice and data getting sent over the Iridium network. It's a satellite network operating low Earth orbit that is providing communications for things such as sailors or even remote workforces that don't necessarily have a reliable cell signal. Starlink's coming online. We've now got UHF FM radio as well. Another curious one as well I have as well that I talk about probably more in geopolitical circles is, do these allow us to jump over things such as the Great Firewall or oppressed environments where the national telecommunications provider is isolating access to resources. Cellular communications as well. This is another area of interest. Is your organisation concerned about someone being able to conduct a person-in-the-middle attack on cell phones, talking to phone towers or even talking to the wrong cell tower? Does that factor into your risk scenario based on known threats and risks that are exploiting these? And then finally, weird, wonderful, and other random technologies that all operate in the ISM band. A few interesting ones I like to point out here. Keyboards and DECT are of interest. One that I have been doing a lot of research on is what are called trunked radio networks in OT environments, as well as even things such as physical access control systems. Interesting one, top right, if you ever get a chance, awesome video, more so for the scientific hooliganism than anything practical, was Rich Healy's research on vulnerabilities in Bluetooth-enabled skateboards, and as he said, being able to cause harm and throw riders off said skateboards. And then finally, other radio networks. These are all networks that are probably registered to some companies that we've pen tested here in Sydney. Within a 5-kilometre radius of the CBD, there's some 27,000 licensed transmitters. And these are using things such as radios, POXTAG, cellular cell phones, public alert systems, maritime systems as well, and also Tetra trunk radio networks. So, continuing on this theme of breaking down, I always try and, when I get my hand on a new piece of wireless technology, I always try coming back to the OSI model to understand what's its attack surface and what can be practically done, whether it's at a physical layer all the way to that second layer of being able to structure into frames, all the way up to even things such as the network layer if it exists, and high-level considerations around business logic and implementation. So this is one I put together about 2018 when I was trying to break down the 802.15.4 attack surface, and then even look at the protocols that are laid on top of that. So what? I come back to my earlier comment. We keep thinking when we talk about wireless pen testing, we keep falling back to it's just 802.11 and we just need a Wi-Fi pineapple. But we've just seen all these extra different technologies that are in use, but we've also often failed to neglect the so what analysis. What can we do as a result of being able to achieve access? We're also seeing an increase in the availability of hardware and technology as well as open source software as well. My favourite example I like using of that is the ISE-3 reboot mission from the 2014, where a few software-defined radio enthusiasts managed to interact with a NASA satellite coming back into Earth orbit after 50 years floating around in space. Historically, only NASA would really be able to control it. These blokes, by reverse engineering the system from manuals, were able to define, encode on standard laptops the system that was communicating and communicate to it via the Arecibo dish. And then things as well to think about individual technologies that might actually be benign in their technical use or in how we approach them, but they may present a bigger risk as their interface is now actually exposed. I also use the example here, chess versus Go. I think a lot of us that have grown up in Western culture understand the concept of chess, the idea that you have a concentration of force, you're focusing on targeting a king, whereas Go, for example, is looking at encirclement. So one of the other takeaways I hope you get from this talk is start thinking through a fairly different process when it comes to breaking down wireless technologies as part of your assessment activities. So how does this look like from a set of practical scenarios? Let's have a look at our range and location considerations. So this was a part of a wireless pen test that my team and I did, whereby the client was the client's key security control for their wireless network was they were, I believe, on the 24th floor in the CBD, and the floors up and down about 6 levels were completely locked. So in this case, we're able to go up through the fire escape and just park outside level 24 in the fire escape and just pick off wireless devices. So one of the other things to be thinking about when you are doing testing such as this is also consider your physical environment. If you think about the slide I had before about the solar power farm, what physical security controls are around that farm besides a couple of fences that we can still communicate, well, we can still receive messages from systems from the other side of those fences. And then how are these controls mutually assured? So does the physical security team understand that, hey, someone's sitting in the fire escape stairwell with a laptop and a wireless card probably isn't there to do something nice. Another one as well, this was from a pen test I did on a building management system several years ago. So you'll see that we saw a sensor in the sensor in the open on the ground floor, which then connected to a receiver that then communicated out to the rest of the building management system to say that, hey, this is the current temperature and the humidity of the building. So why would this be a risk? Any thoughts? It's connected and there's an interconnectedness to it, but why? So if you think about it, that sensor is taking raw data from the environment that is then getting communicated back into a central system to say, hey, the temperature out here is 23 degrees. So if this was, say, for example, a data center, can we actually start manipulating the temperature of the air conditioners that will respond to the data originating from that sensor in order to increase or lower the temperature, and does that then lead to things like arcing within your data center? The more common scenario that we actually talked about in this instance was the vendor for this building was running on margins of about 2%. So if we could increase the cold air that was getting pushed out by the air conditioner, we'd actually see a spike in power, in the price of power, which could then mean that they'd be losing money on this solution if they weren't taking care of it properly, and then applying that over an extended period of time. So once again, this is just us taking wireless technologies and starting to build out into those higher level business logic considerations that we may want to have. I mean, the final one I always like talking about as well is just simple keystroke monitoring and injection. In this case, strong physical controls with our client. However, if we were in about 30 or 40 metres of a keyboard, you can actually see me starting to capture the initial strokes of someone typing in an email to the effect of, good morning, has this been taken care of? And then as well, a little bit later, injecting keystrokes back in to demonstrate that, hey, we can spin up PowerShell and then call out to the internet. So these were just a few of the things that I really want to take everyone through as a thought process for the next time you start doing a wireless penetration test, or wireless starts factoring in as a consideration, or even if we're looking at blowing out of the usual IP addresses or host names that we encounter. Here's several different scenarios and events that may influence us when we start considering approaches for how we conduct these sort of tests. Folks, that's it from me. Thank you for attending CRESTCon, and I'm happy to open it up to any questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ed. Are there any questions around? I've got a couple.
You've got a gentleman down the front here.
Yeah, cheers. I was just going to ask, with some of those sensors and stuff you're talking about, like that one in the last slide, do they still have to follow the protocols on the layer that they're on, like with the your master and slave between sharing passwords and stuff? What kind of protocols do those little sensors and stuff have to follow?
It depends. In this case, the sensor was just simply beaconing out. It did actually go through a handshake process to encrypt between client and between the client on the left-hand side, and the receiver on the right-hand side. So there was still an element of a protocol around that, but I mean that started to become fairly well understood as we were going through our process of building this one out.
I was going to say, and so then once you're able to kind of identify that, you're able to almost replicate the master or the slave in that situation?
Correct. Yep, so in that case, we're able to start injecting our own temperature as a simple example. Another one, this was a fairly quick activity we did. Other one I might do is tell the client, hey, switch over to this channel so that I've got full reign. But even if you just wanted a simple attack, just put a hairdryer on the sensor.
Effective. Were there any other questions in the room? So I got one. So from a testing perspective, like you went through a whole bunch of slides where it was different frequencies, different tools and all that kind of stuff. In your experience, is there a really good resource to kind of say, hey, you know what, if you're, for instance, seek opening up a large building where you have a lot of new technology in place, what are really, really good kind of basic tool sets, and where they're available?
I think firstly, so if you're opening up a new building, probably your first bet would be this resource, MapRad. See if there's any sensors associated with that address or any licensed transmitters. And then I'd take a fairly methodical approach. So firstly, who's built the building? What has been some things that are put in place? Generally speaking, engineers responsible for buildings are a lot better at documenting what they're doing than us in the technology community. But simple resources would include, I think, well, firstly, come back to actually working out what functions are controlled within the building, and then how are they controlled.